Before spring you'll carry our child, the mountain man told her on their wedding night. The wagon lurched over another rut in the frozen Missouri road, and Miriam Walsh gripped the wooden bench until her knuckles went white. 22 years old, round-faced and full-figured, in a way her mother called sturdy, and the Boston society ladies called unfortunate, she had left everything familiar behind for a future written in careful, measured script on 3 letters. Seeking a wife of good character and strong constitution. Must be willing to work hard and bear children. No need for refined manners. Mountain life requires practical skills. Respond if interested. Silas Thorne, Rocky Mountain Territory. The advertisement had been blunt, almost brutal in its honesty. But Miriam's prospects in Boston had been equally blunt. At 22, with no dowry and a figure that scandalized the tight-laced sensibilities of proper society, she had watched younger, prettier girls marry while she helped her widowed mother take in laundry. The letters from Silas Thorne had offered something else: purpose, land, a life where her strong back and capable hands would matter more than her waistline. Now, as the Rocky Mountains rose like jagged teeth against the November sky, she wondered if she'd traded one form of desperation for another. The driver, a grizzled trapper named Marcus, spat tobacco juice over the side. "That's Thorne's land up ahead. See that cabin? Built it himself, stone by stone. Man's got a reputation, Miss Walsh. Hard as the granite in these mountains." Miriam's stomach twisted. "What kind of reputation?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "The kind that keeps him alive out here. Lost his first partner to a grizzly, second one to Blackfoot raiders. Folks say Silas Thorne survives because he's meaner than whatever tries to kill him." He glanced at her sideways. "You sure about this, miss? It ain't too late to turn back." But it was too late. Had been too late since she'd sold her mother's silver locket to pay for the journey west. "I'm sure," she said, though her voice trembled. The cabin was larger than she'd expected, built from dark logs chinked with clay, smoke rising from a stone chimney. A man emerged as the wagon approached, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair streaked with premature gray and a face carved from the same stone as his chimney. He wore buckskin and fur, a hunting knife at his belt, and his eyes were the color of winter ice. Silas Thorne studied her as she climbed down from the wagon, and Miriam felt heat rise to her cheeks under his assessment. She knew what he saw: a woman too large, too plain, too unremarkable for the romantic notion of a frontier bride. "Miss Walsh." His voice was deep, rough as creek gravel. "You're earlier than expected." "The weather held," she managed, clutching her single carpet bag. He nodded to Marcus, pressed coins into the driver's hand. "Obliged." Then to Miriam. "Come, daylight's wasting." No greeting kiss, no welcome, just an order, as if she were hired help rather than his mail-order bride. Miriam followed him inside, Marcus's wagon already rattling back down the mountain road. The cabin's interior was Spartan but clean. A stone fireplace, rough-hewn furniture, shelves lined with traps and tools. Everything spoke of function over comfort, survival over softness. Silas gestured to a bedroom door. "You can put your things there. Supper's at sundown. I expect punctuality." "Mr. Thorne," she began, "we marry tomorrow morning. Reverend Blake's riding up from the settlement." He was already turning away, reaching for his rifle. "I'm checking the trap line. Bar the door behind me." Wait, and then he was gone, leaving Miriam standing alone in the cabin that would be her home, her prison, her future. The wedding was briefer than a Sunday prayer. Reverend Blake, a red-faced man who smelled of whiskey and regret, stumbled through the vows while Silas stood rigid as a sentinel and Miriam tried not to cry. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Silas didn't kiss her. He simply nodded, paid the Reverend, and went back to skinning the beaver pelts he'd brought in that morning. That evening, Miriam cooked her first meal as Mrs. Thorne. venison stew with wild onions and the dried beans she'd found in the pantry. Silas ate in silence, his jaw working methodically. She waited for him to speak, to acknowledge her effort, to say anything. Instead, when he'd cleaned his bowl, he stood, walked to the bedroom, and returned with a folded quilt. He spread it on the floor near the fireplace. "You'll sleep in the bed," he said. "I'll take the floor tonight." Relief and confusion warred in Miriam's chest. "I don't understand." Silas looked at her then, really looked at her, and something cold and determined flickered in those winter ice eyes. "Sit down, Miriam." She sat. He remained standing, backlit by the fire, a dark silhouette against the flames. "I'll be plain with you because that's the only way I know. I need a son to pass on my land and name. My father—" He paused, jaw tightening. "My father made it clear that without an heir, everything I've built means nothing. Without a son, the Thorn name dies with me." Miriam's hands twisted in her lap. "I understand. By spring," he continued, his voice hard as the mountain stone, "you will carry our child. That's the arrangement. That's why you're here." The words landed like physical blows. Miriam had known, of course, that children were expected, but the cold calculation in his voice, the businesslike delivery, it stripped away any romantic notion she'd harbored about frontier life, about building something together. "And if I don't?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Silas's expression didn't change. "Then we've both failed this arrangement." He walked to the bedroom, closed the door. Miriam sat alone by the fire, her wedding night spent in silence and shadows, and wondered what kind of devil's bargain she'd struck. The first weeks were brutal. Silas woke before dawn and expected her to do the same. He assigned tasks like a military commander, hauling water from the creek, tending the small vegetable garden still clinging to life before the deep freeze, mending furs, salting meat. He checked her work with critical eyes, rarely praising, often correcting. At night, he would join her in the bedroom. Their coupling was mechanical, efficient, utterly devoid of tenderness. Afterward, he would turn his back to her, asleep within minutes, while Miriam lay awake feeling like livestock, bred for a specific purpose. She began to hate him, hate his silence, his coldness, the way he looked through her rather than at her. She was a means to an end, nothing more. But then came the day everything changed. Silas had been felling trees for winter firewood when Miriam heard the crash, followed by a shout of pain. She ran, her skirts tangling in the brush, and found him pinned beneath a massive pine trunk, blood streaming from a gash on his temple. "Don't move," he gasped. "Too heavy. Get Marcus." But Marcus was 2 days' ride away, and Silas's face was going pale. Miriam looked at the tree, at her husband's trapped leg, and made a decision. She found his axe, his prying tools. For 3 hours, she worked like a woman possessed, cutting branches, levering the trunk inch by agonizing inch. Her hands blistered and bled. Her back screamed, but she didn't stop. When she finally freed him, Silas's leg was badly bruised but not broken. She half carried, half dragged him back to the cabin, her sturdy frame finally an asset rather than a shame. By nightfall, fever had taken hold. Silas thrashed in the bed, muttering incomprehensibly, while Miriam bathed his forehead with cool water. She dressed his wounds as best she could, but infection was a real danger. On the second night of fever, he began to speak. "Father, please, not worthless." His voice was raw, broken. "Need a son, prove you wrong, not a failure." Miriam leaned closer, straining to hear. "She left. Mother left because of me. Father said I killed her. Being born." Tears leaked from his closed eyes. "Need a son. Make it right. Prove I'm not poison." Suddenly, everything made terrible sense. The desperate need for an heir, the cold efficiency of their marriage. Silas wasn't cruel. He was haunted. driven by a father's rejection and a mother's death he'd carried like stones around his neck since childhood. Miriam took his fevered hand in hers. "You're not poison," she whispered. "You're not worthless, and you don't have to prove anything." She stayed beside him through that night and the next, barely sleeping, forcing water and willow bark tea between his lips. On the third morning, the fever broke. Silas woke to find her slumped in a chair beside the bed, her hair disheveled, dark circles under her eyes. He stared at her for a long moment. "You saved my life," he said quietly. "You're my husband," she replied. "What else would I do?" Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the granite facade. "I've been a bastard to you." Miriam didn't deny it. "Yes, He struggled to sit up, winced. "I don't know how to be anything else." "Then learn," she said simply. "We have time." The change wasn't sudden, but it was real. Silas began asking her opinion on things, how to preserve the late squash, whether to trade pelts now or wait for spring prices. He started doing small things, filling the water buckets before she woke, leaving wildflowers on the table, though he never acknowledged them, teaching her to shoot his rifle, in case something happens to me again. One morning, she woke to the smell of burning and found him in the kitchen, scowling at a pan of charred eggs. "I was trying to make breakfast," he admitted, looking almost embarrassed. "I thought, you've been working hard. You should rest sometimes." The eggs were inedible, but Miriam laughed, the first real laugh since arriving at the cabin. To her shock, Silas's lips quirked in something almost resembling a smile. "I'm a better hunter than cook," he said. "Thank God for that, or we'd starve." That almost smile became almost real. Something warm unfurled in Miriam's chest, fragile as new spring growth. They began talking in the evenings. At first, brief exchanges about the day's work. Then, longer conversations about her life in Boston, his childhood in the mountains. He never spoke directly about his father, but she pieced together the story. A harsh, bitter man who blamed his only son for his wife's death in childbirth, who saw Silas's existence as a curse rather than a blessing. "He said the Thorn name should die with him," Silas confessed one night, staring into the fire. "Said I wasn't fit to carry it forward." "So you left," Miriam said. "So I left. Built this place with my own hands. Swore I'd prove him wrong, that I could build something that mattered, something that would last. By having a son." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw shame in those ice-blue eyes. "I treated you like breeding stock, like you were only valuable for what you could give me." "Yes," she said. "You did. I'm sorry." The words seemed torn from somewhere deep inside him. "I'm so damn sorry, Miriam." She reached across the space between their chairs and took his calloused hand. "Then be better. That's all I ask. I don't know if I can be what you deserve. Then we'll learn together." That night when they went to bed, Silas kissed her forehead before sleep, the first truly tender gesture he had ever made. Miriam felt tears prick her eyes. Maybe, she thought, they could build something real here. Maybe. December arrived with heavy snow, trapping them in the cabin for days at a time. But instead of feeling claustrophobic, Miriam found herself enjoying the enforced intimacy. Silas taught her to card wool, and she taught him to read better. He knew basics, but struggled with longer texts. They played checkers using stones and wood chips. They talked. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Silas told her about his mother for the first time. Her name was Eleanor. Father said she was beautiful, soft-spoken, the exact opposite of him. He paused. "I used to imagine she was like you, strong, capable, someone who didn't break easy." "You don't know I won't break," Miriam said quietly. "Yes, I do. You saved my life. You survived me at my worst. You're stronger than anyone I've ever known." The words settled around her heart like a warm blanket. "Tell me more about her." He did, and in telling, Something in him healed a fraction. Something in them both healed. January brought a crisis. Marcus arrived during a brief thaw, his face grim. Blackfoot raiding party hit the Morrison settlement, killed 2 men, burned 3 cabins. They're moving this direction. Silas's jaw set. How long? Could be a week, could be tomorrow. Marcus looked at Miriam. You should come back with me. Stay in the main settlement until it's safe. No, Miriam said immediately. I'm staying with my husband. Silas turned to her and she saw fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for her. Miriam, if they come, then we'll face them together. For a moment, she thought he'd argue. Instead, he nodded. Together. Marcus left, shaking his head. Silas spent the next days preparing, checking weapons, reinforcing the cabin's shutters, stockpiling ammunition. He taught Miriam to load and fire the rifle, the pistol, the shotgun. She was a surprisingly good shot. You're a natural, he said, and there was pride in his voice, pride in her, not in what she could give him. The raiders came on a night when the moon was dark, 6 of them, faces painted, moving like shadows. Silas spotted them from the lookout post he'd built in the loft. Stay down, he ordered Miriam. No matter what happens, stay down. But she'd never been good at following orders when they didn't make sense. When the first warrior tried to torch the cabin, she shot him through the shutter gap. When another breached the door, she swung the heavy iron skillet into his skull with all her considerable strength. The fight was brutal and short. By dawn, 4 raiders lay dead, 2 had fled, and Silas was bleeding from a knife wound to his shoulder. Miriam was shaking, her dress spattered with blood, some hers, a graze across her arm, some not. Silas pulled her into his arms, heedless of his wound. You magnificent, terrifying woman, he breathed into her hair. I thought I'd lose you. I thought, I'm here, she said. I'm here. I love you. The words burst from him like a confession. God help me, Miriam. I love you. Not for a son, not for the arrangement. I love you. She pulled back to look at him, tears streaming down her face. Say it again. I love you. He cupped her face in his hands. I love your strength, your courage, your stubborn refusal to be anything but exactly who you are. I love that you saved my life twice now. I love... She kissed him, fierce and desperate, and it was nothing like their previous encounters. This was passion, connection, love. When they finally parted, both breathless, she smiled through her tears. I love you too, even though you were a complete bastard for the first 2 months. He laughed, a real laugh, full and genuine. Especially because I was a bastard and you stayed anyway. February arrived, and with it, a discovery. Miriam had been feeling ill in the mornings, her body changing in subtle ways. When she finally admitted to herself what it meant, fear and joy warred within her. What if it was a girl? What if she failed to give him the son he'd wanted so desperately? She told him on a gray afternoon, her voice barely above a whisper. Silas, I'm with child. He went very still. Then, to her shock, he dropped to his knees in front of her chair, pressed his face against her stomach, and his shoulders shook. Silas? She touched his hair, confused. Are you healthy? His voice was muffled. Is the baby healthy? Are you in pain? What do you need? Not joy about the air, not celebration of his mission accomplished, just concern for her. Something broke open inside Miriam, and she began to cry, great gasping sobs she couldn't control. Silas looked up, alarmed, and pulled her into his arms. What's wrong? Is something wrong with the baby? No, she managed through tears. You asked about me first. Not about whether it's a son, not about the inheritance, just me. Understanding dawned in his eyes. He wiped her tears with gentle thumbs. Miriam Walsh Thorne, you listened to me. I was wrong. Wrong about everything. I thought I needed a son to prove my worth, to spite my father, to build a legacy. But what I really needed was you. But if it's a girl, then we'll have a daughter, And I'll love her with everything I have. He pressed his forehead to hers. You're not a means to an end. You're my wife. You're my love. You're the person who taught me that worth doesn't come from bloodlines or vindication. It comes from this. From us, from building a life together. You mean that? I mean it, and I want to be a better husband, a better father than mine ever was, not because I'm trying to prove anything, but because you both deserve it. She kissed him then, soft and sweet, and felt the last walls around her heart crumble. The pregnancy was difficult. Miriam's body, though strong, struggled with the mountain altitude and harsh conditions. There were days she couldn't keep food down, nights when her back ached so badly she couldn't sleep. Silas was patient beyond measure, tending her with gentle hands, reading to her from his mother's old Bible, holding her when she cried from frustration and fear. In April, Marcus brought news. Silas's father had died. The old man had left everything to a distant cousin, writing in his will that, "My son Silas is dead to me, as he should have died at birth." Miriam watched her husband read the letter, saw his jaw work. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I'm not." He crumpled the paper. He was a bitter, broken man who tried to break me too. But he failed. He looked at Miriam, at the swell of her belly beneath her dress. "Because I found something he never could. Love that isn't conditional. Family that isn't based on expectations and disappointment." "You're free of him now," she said. "I was free the moment I chose you over his poison." He took her hand. "I want to write him a letter. One he'll never read, but I need to write it anyway." That evening, by firelight, Silas wrote to his dead father. Miriam watched the words pour from him: anger, grief, forgiveness, liberation. When he finished, he didn't seal the letter. He simply fed it to the fire, page by page, watching his past burn to ash. "It's done," he said. "I'm done carrying his ghosts." Miriam held him, and they both cried. For the boy he'd been, for the father he'd never had, for the wounds that were finally beginning to heal. September arrived in a blaze of gold aspen leaves. Miriam's labor began on a cool morning and lasted through the day and into the night. Silas stayed with her, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement when she screamed that she couldn't do this anymore. "You can," he insisted. "You're the strongest person I know. You can do anything." When the baby finally came, slippery and wailing, into the world, the midwife from the settlement announced, "It's a girl, a healthy baby girl." Miriam looked at Silas through exhausted tears, waiting for disappointment to cloud his eyes. Instead, he looked at their daughter, red-faced and furious and perfect, and smiled. It was the most beautiful smile Miriam had ever seen. "She's perfect," he breathed. He looked at Miriam. "And so are you." "You wanted a son," she whispered, searching his face for any hint of regret. He shook his head, taking the baby from the midwife with surprising gentleness. "I thought I did. But what I really needed was a family. And now I have one." He pressed a kiss to the baby's forehead, then to Miriam's. "She's everything. You're not disappointed?" "How could I be disappointed in this miracle?" He settled the baby into Miriam's arms. "She'll be strong like her mother, brave like her mother. She'll be everything that matters." They named her Hope Eleanor Thorne. Hope for their future, Eleanor for the grandmother she'd never know, but whose strength lived on in her father's newfound ability to love. The first year of Hope's life was exhausting and beautiful. Silas proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with a colicky baby at 3 a.m, changing soiled diapers without complaint, singing off-key lullabies that made Hope giggle. He built her a cradle from pine, carved animals for her to play with, and read to her every night, even though she was too young to understand. When Hope was 14 months old, Miriam discovered she was pregnant again. This time, there was no fear, no anxiety about disappointing her husband. Just joy. Their second daughter, Grace Margaret Thorne, arrived the following spring. Easier labor, louder cry, same perfect miracle. Silas held both his daughters in his big arms and declared himself the richest man in the territory. One evening, as Miriam nursed Grace while Hope played with wooden blocks at Silas's feet, he said quietly, "Two daughters are worth more than a dozen sons. They'll grow up strong like their mother. They'll know they're loved for exactly who they are, not for what I need them to be." Miriam looked at her husband, this man who'd been so cold, so desperate, so damaged, and saw only love. "You're a good father, Silas Thorne." "I'm trying to be the father mine never was." He picked up Hope, who squealed with delight. "These girls will never question whether they're wanted. They'll never feel like they have to earn my love." "No," Miriam agreed, "they won't." 5 years after that brutal wedding night, Miriam stood in their garden, much larger now, fed by an irrigation system Silas had built, watching her husband teach their daughters to identify animal tracks. Hope, almost 6, was already a keen observer. Grace, 4, was more interested in the butterflies flitting among the bean plants. Marcus rode up grinning. "Heard you folks had another addition to the family." Silas straightened, confused. "Another?" "The Morrison family's headed back east, leaving their youngest boy, Charlie, 8 years old, orphaned. Wondered if you might take him in. You've got the space and the boy needs a home." Miriam looked at Silas, saw him looking back at her. A silent conversation passed between them. "Yes," they said together. Charlie arrived a week later, wary and silent, expecting to be worked like a farmhand and shown the door at 18. Instead, he found himself at a table with 2 little girls who insisted he was their brother now, and a mountain man who said, "You're family now, son. No conditions, no expectations except that you be yourself." It took months for Charlie to believe them, but eventually he did. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Silas woke Miriam before dawn and led her outside. The sky was just beginning to lighten, stars fading against the approaching day. "Do you remember our wedding night?" he asked. "Hard to forget. I told you that by spring you'd carry our child. I made it sound like a command, like a business transaction." He turned to face her. "I want to do that moment over." Miriam smiled. "You can't undo the past, Silas." "No, but I can replace it with something better." He took her hands. "Miriam Thorne, I want to spend the rest of my life loving you. Not because you've given me children, though our children are blessings beyond measure. Not because you've made my life easier, though you have. But because you saw the broken man I was and loved me anyway. You taught me that worth comes from love, not legacy. You taught me to be human again." Tears slid down Miriam's cheeks. "Silas, before spring," he said softly, "before summer, before winter, before every season for the rest of our lives, I will love you. That's my vow. That's my promise." She kissed him as the sun broke over the mountains, painting the world in gold and promise. Behind them, the cabin held their sleeping children, 2 daughters, 1 adopted son, and the family they'd built from broken pieces and desperate hope. "I love you too," she whispered against his lips, "my husband, my home." And as the sun rose on another day in the Rocky Mountains, Miriam Walsh Thorne, once a desperate mail-order bride, now a wife, mother, and partner in every sense, knew that she had found something worth more than all the refinement of Boston society, all the expectations of a bitter old man, all the fear and uncertainty of that first brutal winter. She had found love, real, hard-won, imperfect, beautiful love. And it was everything. She was the last one left unwanted, until a mountain man rode into town looking for her. The September sun hung heavy over Maplewood, Massachusetts, casting long shadows across the town square where wooden tables had been arranged in neat rows. Banners declaring "Marriage Market 1819" fluttered in the crisp autumn breeze, their cheerful colors a stark contrast to the knot of dread tightening in Violet Henderson's stomach. "Stand up straight," her mother hissed, adjusting the collar of Violet's best dress, a faded blue cotton that strained across her full figure. And for heaven's sake, smile. No man wants a sour-faced wife. Violet forced her lips upward, though the expression felt more like a grimace. At 26, she was well past the age most women married, and her generous curves had become the subject of whispered conversations and pitying glances throughout the town. The marriage market, an annual event where unmarried women from across New England gathered to meet westward-bound men seeking wives, was her mother's last desperate attempt at offloading what the family increasingly viewed as a burden. "At least try to find someone," her mother continued, voice sharp with frustration. "We can't feed you forever, Violet. Your father's mill barely keeps us afloat as it is." The words struck like physical blows, but Violet kept her expression neutral. She had heard variations of this speech for years now, each iteration chipping away at whatever remained of her self-worth. The market opened with a bell at precisely 9 o'clock. Men flooded in, farmers from Vermont, traders from Connecticut, adventurers heading to the Western Territories. They moved through the rows of waiting women like buyers at a livestock auction, appraising and evaluating with barely concealed calculation. Violet watched as the prettier girls were approached immediately. Margaret Ainsworth, with her golden curls and tiny waist, had 3 suitors within the first 10 minutes. Even plain Mary Thompson, whose face bore the scars of childhood pox, received interested inquiries. She was thin and known to be an excellent cook. But when men approached Violet's table, their eyes would scan her figure, expressions shifting from curiosity to poorly disguised disappointment. They would nod politely and move on without a word. By noon of the first day, Violet had not received a single genuine inquiry. "Perhaps if you hadn't eaten breakfast," her mother muttered during the midday break, "you might look less substantial." Violet said nothing. What was there to say? The second day proved even worse. As other women paired off, laughing and chatting with potential husbands, Violet remained alone at her table, feeling increasingly like a piece of unwanted merchandise. One particularly cruel moment came when a grizzled trader stopped before her, looked her up and down, and said loud enough for others to hear, "Sorry, miss, I need a wife who won't eat all the food on the trail west." Laughter rippled through nearby conversations. Violet bit her lip hard enough to taste blood, forcing herself not to cry in front of these people who had already witnessed her humiliation. By the final afternoon, every other woman had found a match, even Widow Abernathy, who was 43 with 4 children. The dancing began, couples twirling across the square in celebration of new beginnings. Violet sat alone on a wooden bench at the edge of the festivities, watching happiness bloom around her while emptiness hollowed out her chest. She would leave soon, she decided. Return home to her parents' disappointment and another year of being treated like a millstone around their necks. Perhaps she could find work as a seamstress or a companion to an elderly woman. Anything would be better than remaining in Maplewood, where everyone knew her as the girl too fat to marry. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when Violet stood to leave. She had taken perhaps 3 steps when the sound of galloping hooves thundered into the square. The horse and rider burst into town like a force of nature, all wild motion and barely contained energy. The stallion was massive, black as midnight, and the man atop it seemed carved from the mountains themselves. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair hanging past his collar and a beard that had clearly gone months without trimming, he commanded immediate attention. The dancing stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every eye turned to watch as the stranger reined his horse to a stop in the center of the square, his gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd with fierce intensity. "I'm looking for Violet Henderson," he called out, his voice rough from disuse but carrying clearly across the sudden silence. "Is she here?" Violet's heart stuttered. No one had spoken her name with such urgency in her entire life. Slowly, as if moving through deep water, she raised her hand. The man's eyes locked onto her, and something like relief flooded his weathered features. He dismounted in one fluid motion and strode toward her, the crowd parting before him. When he reached her, he did something that made Violet's breath catch and the entire assembly gasp. He dropped to one knee. "Are you Violet Henderson?" he asked, looking up at her with eyes the color of storm clouds. Yes," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who are you?" "Nathan Cross." He took a deep breath, as if steadying himself for a difficult task. "Your brother Samuel saved my life 3 years ago during a blizzard in the Montana Territory. Before he died, he made me promise to find you and take care of you. I've been searching ever since." The world tilted. Violet's legs went weak, and she grasped the bench behind her for support. Samuel, her brother, who had run away from home 10 years ago when she was 16, who their parents refused to speak of, who she had assumed was either dead or had forgotten about her entirely. "Samuel he's dead?" The words came out broken. Nathan's expression softened with genuine sorrow. "Yes, I'm sorry, but he died a hero, and his last thoughts were of you. He made me swear on my life that I would find you and make sure you were safe and happy." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. She is someone looking for her? A mountain man came all this way? Maybe she's not so unwanted after all. Nathan stood, turning to address the assembled townspeople. His voice rang with authority that silenced the whispers. "I've spent 3 years tracking down leads, traveling from territory to territory, following every rumor of a Henderson family in Massachusetts. I'm here to fulfill a promise to a man who saved my life." He turned back to Violet, and his expression gentled. "I can't offer you romance or pretty words, Miss Henderson. I don't know how to court a lady or dance at fancy parties, but I can offer you a home in the mountains, respect, protection, and a chance at a new life. Your brother believed you deserved happiness, and I aim to provide it if you'll let me." Violet's mind raced. This couldn't be real. Men didn't appear out of nowhere offering salvation to women like her. This had to be some elaborate joke, a cruel prank orchestrated by the same people who had spent 2 days ignoring her existence. But Nathan's eyes held no mockery, only earnestness and a bone-deep weariness that spoke of long miles traveled and promises weighing heavy on his soul. "Why?" she asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. "Why would you search for 3 years? You didn't even know me." "Because Samuel died giving me his last can of beans when I was starving. Because he used his own body to shield me from the worst of the wind, and it cost him his life. Because when I buried him in that frozen ground, I looked at his face and saw peace, like he knew he'd done something that mattered. He talked about you constantly during those final days. Said you were the kindest person he'd ever known, that he regretted every day he'd been away from you." Tears spilled down Violet's cheeks. She barely remembered making the decision before she heard herself say, "Yes, I'll come with you." Nathan's shoulders sagged with relief. For the first time, a smile touched his weathered face, small and uncertain, like he'd forgotten how. "Thank you. We'll leave tonight if you're willing. I have supplies and there's a cabin waiting in Montana." "Tonight?" Violet's mother pushed through the crowd, her face pale with shock. Surely she needs time to prepare, to gather her things. "What things, Mother?" Violet's voice came out stronger than she'd ever heard it. "The dresses that don't fit properly, the books you've been threatening to sell. I have nothing here that I can't leave behind." Her mother flinched, but Violet felt no satisfaction in the words, only a numb sort of finality. Within 2 hours, Violet had packed her few belongings into a saddlebag Nathan provided. Her parents stood in awkward silence as she said goodbye to the only home she'd ever known. Her father pressed $5 into her hand, more guilt than generosity, she suspected, while her mother simply nodded stiffly. "Right when you're settled," her mother said, the words clearly forced. "I will," Violet replied, knowing she probably wouldn't. Nathan helped her onto a second horse he'd brought, a gentle mare named Birch. As they rode out of Maplewood under the purple-gold sunset, Violet looked back once. The town where she had never belonged grew smaller behind them, and she felt something loosen in her chest. Whatever lay ahead in the mountains with this strange, solemn man, it had to be better than being slowly crushed under the weight of other people's disappointment. They traveled for 3 days before Nathan began to truly speak. The first nights had been filled with awkward silence, Violet uncertain how to act around this man who was essentially a stranger, and Nathan seemingly lost in his own thoughts. They would make camp, eat a simple dinner of dried meat and hardtack, and sleep on opposite sides of the fire. On the 4th evening, as they sat watching the flames dance, Violet gathered her courage. "Tell me about Samuel, please. I need to know what happened to him." Nathan was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he began to speak, his voice low and distant, as if seeing events unfold before him. "Winter of 1816. I was trapping beaver in the high country, got caught in an early blizzard that came out of nowhere. Lost my horse, most of my supplies. Temperature dropped so fast my water froze solid in minutes. I was trying to find shelter when I collapsed in a snowdrift. Would have died there if Samuel hadn't found me." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "He had a small camp about a mile from where I fell. Dragged me there, got me warm, shared his food even though he didn't have much. That storm lasted 4 days. We talked a lot during those days." "What did he say about me?" Violet asked softly. Nathan's lips quirked slightly. "Everything. How you used to follow him everywhere when you were small. How you'd sneak him extra food when your parents punished him. How you cried the night he left and he almost stayed because of it. He said you were the only person in that house who ever made him feel like he mattered." Violet's throat tightened. She'd been 16 when Samuel disappeared, and she'd always wondered if he'd given her any thought after leaving. "The storm finally broke on the 5th day," Nathan continued, his voice growing heavier. "But the temperature stayed brutal. We knew we had to move or we'd run out of food. Samuel gave me his heavy coat, said he was used to the cold. We started down the mountain." He fell silent again, and Violet could see the memories playing across his face like shadows. "About halfway down, we hit a patch of ice hidden under fresh snow. I went through, fell into a crevasse. Samuel pulled me out, but it cost him. He was soaked to the skin in that freezing water. By the time we found shelter, hypothermia had set in. He knew he wasn't going to make it. He gave me everything," Nathan said, his voice rough with emotion. "His remaining food, his dry clothes, his warmth. Made me promise over and over that I'd find you, make sure you were safe. Said he'd failed you once by leaving, and he wouldn't fail you again. He died in his sleep that night. I buried him under a pine tree on the mountain, carved his name into the bark." Violet was crying openly now, and Nathan moved around the fire to sit beside her, not touching, but close enough that his presence felt like comfort. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I know it's not what you wanted to hear." "No," Violet managed through her tears. "Thank you for telling me, for keeping your promise to him." They sat in companionable silence after that, and Violet felt something shift between them. Nathan was no longer just the stranger fulfilling an obligation. He was the man who had honored her brother's dying wish, who had spent 3 years searching for someone he'd never met. That kind of loyalty was rare and precious. They reached Nathan's cabin 3 weeks later, and Violet found herself staring at what would be her new home with a mixture of relief and trepidation. The structure was solid, built from thick pine logs with a stone chimney and real glass windows, which surprised her. She'd expected something more primitive. "Built it myself over 2 summers, Nathan said, dismounting and helping her down. "Figured if I was going to live out here, I should do it properly." Inside, the single room was spartanly furnished but clean. A wide bed took up one corner, a table and chairs another. Shelves lined one wall, holding supplies and a surprising number of books. A rocking chair sat near the hearth. "I'll build a partition," Nathan said, following her gaze to the bed. "Give you privacy. Until then, I'll sleep outside or in the lean-to where I keep the horses." "Nathan, it's proper," he said firmly. "I promised Samuel I'd take care of you, not compromise you." Over the following weeks, Violet discovered that life with Nathan held a rhythm she'd never experienced before. He rose before dawn to check his trap lines and hunt, but he always made sure there was water warming by the fire when she woke. He taught her how to cure meat, how to read the sky for weather, how to identify edible plants in the forest. He spoke little, but his actions showed consideration at every turn. Violet, in turn, transformed the cabin into something approaching a home. She scrubbed and organized, planted a small herb garden near the door, and used her sewing skills to create curtains for the windows. She cooked proper meals instead of Nathan's bachelor fare, and he praised every dish like it was a feast. The partition Nathan built gave her a small private space, but Violet found herself spending most evenings on the other side, sitting by the fire while Nathan carved wooden bowls or repaired tools. They talked more easily now, about everything and nothing. Nathan had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he was comfortable, and Violet discovered she enjoyed making him laugh. But there was an elephant in the room neither acknowledged: what exactly their relationship was supposed to be. Winter came early to the mountains that year. By October, snow was falling regularly, and Nathan began making preparations for the months of isolation ahead. One afternoon, while hauling wood, he slipped on ice and gashed his leg badly on a sharp rock. Violet heard his curse from inside and rushed out to find him bleeding profusely. Terror gripped her as she helped him inside, images of him dying like Samuel, leaving her alone in this wilderness, flashing through her mind. "It's not that bad," Nathan gritted out, but his face was pale. Violet worked with shaking hands to clean and bandage the wound, drawing on half-remembered lessons from helping the doctor in Maplewood years ago. The cut was deep but clean. Nathan watched her face the entire time, something unreadable in his expression. "You're good at this," he said quietly. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "If you died." "I'm not going to die from a cut leg, Violet." Samuel probably didn't think he'd die from the cold either. The words burst out before she could stop them. "You can't leave me. I can't. I won't survive losing someone else." Nathan reached up and caught her hand. "Hey, look at me." She did, finding his storm-gray eyes steady and sure. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm too stubborn to die from something as simple as a gash." He squeezed her fingers. "But Violet, I need to tell you something. I should have told you weeks ago." Dread pooled in her stomach. "What?" Nathan took a deep breath. "The promise I made to Samuel. It wasn't exactly what I told everyone in Maplewood." Violet's heart stopped. What do you mean?" "He did make me promise to find you. But there's more." Nathan held her gaze. "Samuel and I talked a lot during those 4 days in the storm. He told me about your family, how they treated you, how they made you feel worthless because of how you looked. He was furious about it. Made me describe my cabin, my life here, whether I thought you could be happy in Montana." "I don't understand," Violet whispered. "He was matchmaking," Nathan said simply. "Samuel knew he was dying even before that last day. The cold had gotten into him deeper than he let on. So he spent his final hours convincing me that you and I would suit each other. He said you deserved a man who would appreciate your kindness, your strength, your courage. He said I deserved someone who would make my life less lonely." Violet pulled her hand away, standing abruptly. "So this was all... what? A setup? Your dead friend's matchmaking scheme?" "At first, yes." Nathan struggled to his feet, wincing at the pain in his leg. "I came looking for you out of obligation and curiosity. But Violet, somewhere between Maplewood and here, something changed. Spending time with you, watching you turn this cabin into a home, hearing your laugh, seeing how brave you are even when you're scared." He broke off, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I'm not good with words. But what I'm trying to say is that I didn't fall in love with you because Samuel told me to. I fell in love with you because you're the most remarkable woman I've ever known." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "You... what?" "I love you," Nathan said, the words rough but certain. "I've probably loved you since that first night on the trail when you asked me about Samuel and cried for the brother you lost. I just didn't know how to tell you without it seeming like I was trying to take advantage of the situation." Violet's mind reeled. She thought of the past months, of Nathan's quiet care, his consideration, the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. She thought of how safe she felt here, how seen, how valued, not despite who she was, but because of it. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't have to say anything." Nathan limped back to his chair by the fire. "I just needed you to know the truth. We can go on as we have been, friends and housemates. I won't press you for more than you're willing to give." Violet stood frozen for a long moment, her heart pounding. Then she crossed the room and knelt beside Nathan's chair, taking his weathered hand in both of hers. "When I was sitting on that bench in Maplewood," she said slowly, "watching everyone else find happiness while I sat alone, I thought my life was over. I thought I would never be anything more than a burden, an embarrassment, someone to be pitied or ignored." She looked up at him, tears gathering in her eyes. "But then you came. You rode into that square like something out of a storybook, and for the first time in my entire life, someone was looking for me. Someone wanted me." "Violet, let me finish," she said gently. "These past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You've never once made me feel like I was too much or not enough. You've treated me with kindness and respect, and you've given me a home where I actually belong." She squeezed his hand. "I think I've been falling in love with you too. I was just too afraid to admit it, even to myself." Nathan's expression cracked open, raw emotion flooding his face. "Are you certain? I'm not an easy man to live with. I'm rough around the edges. I don't know fancy manners, and this life is hard." "I'm certain," Violet said, and she was. More certain than she'd been of anything in her life. "I love you, Nathan Cross, not because my brother wanted me to, but because you've shown me what it feels like to be cherished. Dear." Nathan pulled her up and into his lap, careful of his injured leg, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying. "We should probably do this properly," Nathan said, his voice thick with emotion. "Get married by a minister and all that." Violet laughed through her tears. "The nearest minister is 3 days' ride away, and you can barely walk." "Fair point." He cupped her face in his hands. "Then how about this? I, Nathan Cross, promise before God in these mountains to love you, honor you, and stand beside you for all the days of my life. I promise to build you a proper house with separate rooms for our children. I promise to never make you feel less than the amazing woman you are." "I, Violet Henderson," she said, her voice trembling, "promise to love you, support you, and fill your days with warmth and laughter. I promise to make this cabin a home, to stand strong beside you through whatever comes, and to remind you every day that Samuel's faith in both of us was not misplaced." They sealed the promises with another kiss, and later, as they lay curled together in Nathan's bed with the fire burning low, Violet felt a peace settle over her soul that she'd never known before. Spring came slowly to the Montana territory, creeping up the mountain in increments of melting snow and budding aspens. Violet spent the warming days planning a proper garden, while Nathan began building an addition to the cabin, a second room that would eventually become a nursery, though neither spoke the hope aloud yet. They had married officially in March, when the trails cleared enough for the circuit preacher to make his rounds. The ceremony was simple, held in the cabin with only a passing trader and his wife as witnesses, but Violet treasured every moment. She wore a dress she'd sewn from fabric Nathan had brought back from his last supply run, and he'd trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair in a way that made her laugh and call him handsome. Life was good, better than good. Violet woke each morning next to the man she loved, spent her days building their life together, and fell asleep each night feeling grateful beyond measure. Then, one afternoon in late May, a stranger appeared at their door. Nathan was out checking the trap line, and Violet was kneading bread when she heard the horse approaching. She wiped flour from her hands and opened the door to find a well-dressed man dismounting, someone whose clothes and bearing spoke of Eastern wealth. "Good afternoon," he said, removing his hat politely. "I'm looking for Nathan Cross. Is this his residence?" "It is," Violet said cautiously. "He'll be back within the hour. May I ask your business?" The man's expression grew grave. "My name is Thomas Henderson." "I believe I may be your cousin." Violet's world lurched. Henderson wasn't a common name, but she'd never heard of a Thomas in her family tree. "I don't understand," she said. "May I come in?" Thomas asked. "What I have to tell you concerns your brother Samuel, and it's not something I can explain briefly." With trembling hands, Violet let him in and offered tea, which he accepted. They sat at the table in awkward silence until Nathan returned. Her husband took one look at the stranger and immediately positioned himself between Thomas and Violet, his body tense. "Who are you?" Nathan demanded. "Thomas Henderson. I'm Violet's cousin, her father's brother's son. I've been looking for her and Samuel for nearly 4 years." "Samuel is dead," Nathan said flatly. "I know. I found his grave 2 months ago. That's what led me here." Thomas pulled papers from his jacket. "I'm sorry to bring difficult news, but I think you both should know the truth about Samuel's past and why he really left home." Over the next hour, Thomas unfolded a story that shattered everything Violet thought she knew about her brother. Samuel hadn't run away. He'd been chased away, falsely accused of theft by a business rival of their father's. The accusation had been orchestrated to destroy their father's mill, using Samuel as leverage. Rather than let his family suffer, Samuel had fled, hoping to clear his name from afar. "He spent years gathering evidence," Thomas explained. "He'd hired me, I'm a lawyer, to help him build a case. We were close to proving his innocence when he disappeared into the Western Territories. I've been searching ever since." "Why?" Violet asked, her voice hollow. "Why would you spend so much time on this?" Thomas looked uncomfortable. "Because Samuel was right. He was innocent. And because—" he hesitated. "Because my father was the one who orchestrated the false accusation. When I discovered what he'd done, I devoted myself to making it right." Nathan's hand found Violet's under the table, gripping tight. "There's more," Thomas said quietly. "Samuel didn't die penniless in the mountains. He'd struck gold, a significant vein, 2 months before he found Nathan. He'd registered the claim under both his and Violet's names. With the evidence I've compiled proving his innocence and the value of the gold claim, your family is now quite wealthy, Mrs. Cross." The room spun. Violet felt Nathan's arm around her, steadying her. "How wealthy?" Nathan asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Enough that you'd never need to trap another beaver or worry about supplies again." Thomas spread the legal documents across the table. "The gold mine alone is worth tens of thousands of dollars. Combined with the compensation due for the false accusation and Samuel's cleared name, you're looking at a small fortune." Violet stared at the papers, unable to process what they meant. Her brother, her brave, kind brother, had been working to clear his name all along, and he'd made sure she would be provided for, even if he never made it back himself. "He truly loved you," Thomas said gently. "Every letter he sent me mentioned you. He wanted to come back when his name was cleared, to rescue you from your parents' house, to give you the life you deserved." After Thomas left that evening, promising to return with more documents to sign, Violet and Nathan sat by the fire in silence. Finally, Violet spoke. "This changes everything, doesn't it?" Nathan didn't answer right away. "Does it have to? We're wealthy now. We could leave Montana, go anywhere, live in a city, have servants, wear fine clothes. Is that what you want? Nathan asked, turning to look at her. Violet met his eyes and found her answer there. No, this is my home. You're my home. But Nathan, the money could help so many people. We could help other women like me, the ones society throws away. We could build something meaningful. A slow smile spread across Nathan's face. You're remarkable, you know that? Most people would be thinking about what they could buy for themselves. I spent 26 years being treated as worthless, Violet said. I know what that feels like. If Samuel's sacrifice can prevent others from feeling that way, then his death meant something more. Over the next 2 years, Nathan and Violet used Samuel's legacy to transform not just their own lives, but the lives of countless others. They kept their cabin in Montana, their sanctuary and home, but purchased property in a small but growing town at the base of the mountains. There, they established the Samuel Henderson Home for Women, a place where unmarried women, widows, and those fleeing difficult circumstances could find shelter, learn trades, and start fresh lives. Violet oversaw the operations while Nathan managed the finances and property maintenance. The home's reputation spread quickly. Women arrived from across the territory, some escaping abusive situations, others simply seeking opportunity in a world that offered them few options. Violet taught sewing, cooking, and household management, but she also brought in teachers for reading, writing, and arithmetic. She wanted these women to have choices. One day in autumn, 2 years after Thomas's revelation, a young woman arrived who made Violet's heart stop. She was 17, rail-thin, with bruises barely hidden under her sleeves. "My name is Margaret," she said quietly. "I heard this was a place where women could be safe." Violet recognized immediately what she saw in Margaret's eyes, the same hopelessness that had filled her own during those last days in Maplewood. She took the girl's hands gently. "You're safe here. Whatever you're running from, it can't reach you now." Margaret broke down sobbing, and as Violet held her, she felt the circle complete. She had been saved by her brother's love and Nathan's promise. Now she could pay that forward, offering others the second chance she'd been given. That evening, as Violet and Nathan sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, she leaned against his shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Keeping that promise to Samuel? Your life would have been simpler without me." Nathan pulled her closer. "Simpler, maybe, but infinitely lonelier and less meaningful. You taught me that living isn't the same as having a life worth living." "Samuel would be proud of what we've built," Violet said softly. "He'd be proud of you," Nathan corrected. "I'm just the lucky man who gets to stand beside you." 3 years after their marriage, Violet stood in the spring garden behind their cabin, one hand resting on her swollen belly. She was 7 months along, and the baby, their daughter, the midwife predicted, kicked vigorously against her ribs. Nathan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around them both. "Feeling all right?" "She's active today," Violet said with a smile. "Takes after her father." "God help us if she has your stubbornness." Violet laughed and turned in his arms. At 31, she barely recognized the woman she'd been 5 years ago in Maplewood. That Violet had been defeated, convinced of her own worthlessness, ready to accept whatever scraps life threw her way. This Violet, the one reflected in Nathan's loving gaze, was strong, purposeful, and deeply happy. "I want to name her Sarah," Violet said, "after Samuel." Nathan's eyes grew suspiciously bright. He'd like that. They had visited Samuel's grave the previous summer, bringing Thomas Henderson along. Together, the three of them had erected a proper headstone, engraved with words Violet had chosen carefully. Samuel Henderson, beloved brother and friend, who gave everything so others could live his legacy. Indoors, in the lives he touched beneath it, they'd buried a box containing letters from women who had passed through the Samuel Henderson home, testimonials to how his sacrifice had rippled outward, changing dozens of lives for the better. "Do you think he knows?" Violet asked Nathan as they stood in their garden. "Do you think he can see what we've built?" "I think he knows," Nathan said, "and I think he's pleased. Not just because of the home or the women we've helped, but because you're happy. That's what he wanted most." Sarah Rose Cross was born on a bright June morning, coming into the world with a lusty cry that echoed through the cabin. Nathan wept when he held his daughter for the first time, this mountain man who had once thought himself too rough for family and tenderness. "She's perfect," he whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes. "Of course she is," Violet said tiredly from the bed. "She's ours." They spent Sarah's first weeks in the cocoon of new parenthood, marveling at every sound she made, every expression that crossed her small face. Violet had worried during her pregnancy that her body, so long scorned by others, would somehow fail her in motherhood. Instead, she found herself strong and capable, her body doing exactly what it needed to do. When Sarah was 3 months old, they made the journey down to the Samuel Henderson home for a special dedication ceremony. The original building had grown to include 2 additional structures, and they were adding a third, a school where women could receive proper education. Thomas Henderson attended, along with nearly 50 current and former residents of the home. As Violet stood before them holding Sarah, she felt the weight and wonder of the journey that had brought her here. 5 years ago, she began, her voice carrying across the assembled group. "I sat on a bench in Maplewood, Massachusetts, believing I had no value, no future, no hope. I was the last one left unwanted at a marriage market, convinced that my worth as a person could be measured by the number of men who chose not to approach me." She paused, looking down at her daughter, then up at Nathan, who stood beside her with pride shining in his eyes. But my brother Samuel believed differently. Even in his final moments, he thought about me, worried about me, and set in motion events that would lead to my salvation. He sent Nathan Cross to find me, and in doing so, gave me not just a husband, but a partner, a friend, and a love I never dreamed I deserved. Violet's gaze swept across the women gathered before her, young and old from all backgrounds, each carrying their own stories of hardship and hope. "This home exists because Samuel believed every person has value, regardless of what society tells them. He believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. And now, through all of you, his belief continues to spread. Every woman who passes through these doors, who learns a trade, who finds her strength, who starts a new life, you're all part of Samuel's legacy." She lifted Sarah slightly. "This little girl will grow up knowing her uncle's story. She'll grow up understanding that love isn't about appearances or wealth or meeting someone else's arbitrary standards. She'll learn that true worth comes from kindness, courage, and the willingness to help others find their own path." The dedication ceremony concluded with the planting of a tree, a white pine like the one under which Samuel was buried. As Violet patted the soil around its roots, she spoke silently to the brother she'd lost. "Thank you, Samuel, for remembering me, for believing in me, for giving me Nathan. We'll honor your memory by helping others the way you tried to help me. Rest well, knowing your sacrifice meant something."